turn with me either in a Bible to the Gospel of Mark, or you'll see it on the front of your Grow Pray study guide. We'll share in our scripture passage for this morning. So I invite you to hear now these words from Mark's Gospel. And a large crowd followed Jesus and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that the power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples said to him, "You see the crowd is pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
While we were at camp last week in CYF conference, several of us got into a discussion about travel. We had a peace intern who came to our camp last week, and she had come from another region, and having done their CYF conference, she did ours, and she left again on an airplane to go to the next camp and the next camp, and all summer long she'll be traveling all over the country. We also had a global ministries partner who does his ministry and work on your behalf in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Beirut, Lebanon. So we got to talking about travel and what it's like to travel, where we would like to go, where we don't want to go in our travels. And one of our campers mentioned wanting to go to Israel, to take a trip to the Holy Land, and it sparked my memory. Sparked my memory of a trip that I took to the Holy Land in 1999 while I was in seminary. And I tell you that there is nothing quite like walking in the same dust that Jesus walked, the same places that he traveled. The scriptures came to life for me when I went to Israel in a way that they never had before. It was so invigorating to be in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem and in Nazareth and in Jericho, and to read those stories and scriptures of Jesus in those same places. As I said, I went with my seminary, and before we went, our professors held several training sessions for us. Sessions on how to pack, and what to pack or not pack, what clothing we might need to consider, and what cultural expectations we might have for visiting holy sites, how to exchange our dollars and our American money into shekels. And then we had instruction on airline and airplane etiquette for traveling with strict Jews who observed prayer time. When we were on the plane going over to Israel and coming back, when it was time for prayer, those who were Jewish among us got up from their seats and they wrapped themselves in prayer shawls. And they stood in the aisles facing west and they prayed. And I would not have expected it had my professors not told us about it. I had never experienced anything like that. Among the things that we were also told about going to Israel was to be careful of pickpockets, because we would be tourists, and the more you look like a tourist, the easier you are as a target for those who might want to steal something from you. When we were in the ancient city of Jerusalem, it was crowded, and I mean thick with people. There were people everywhere, so close together, and we were all pressed in on one another. And most of my classmates hated that day on our trip, because we Americans are accustomed to our little personal bubble, that personal space that we have. But there is no such thing in the Middle East as a personal space bubble. And so there was this sea of humanity all pressed in together, people speaking different languages and people from different cultures all clashing together in a wall-to-wall mass. It was my favorite day. The old city of Jerusalem is a walled city, so there is really nowhere to escape once you were inside the city. And maybe you've never been in a city and been that crowded, but if you've ever been in a crowded elevator, maybe you know this feeling when there's so many people who are packed into an elevator and you're still trying to make room for that one more person who's just standing on the outside waiting for you to move over as much as you can so they can wiggle their way in with you. Everybody is touching somebody else. And you all are shuffling sideways or moving backward, trying to get up against the wall so that person can get in. In that situation, where there's so many people pressed in together, it seems an odd thing to say, who just touched me? I mean, everybody is touching everybody. But that question would make sense. Even in a really crowded space, if you felt that someone was maybe making a grab for your wallet, if that was the case, and you sensed it, you might then ask about it. In Mark 5, it's the same thing that we see for Jesus. Someone has touched him with a purpose. It's a different kind of touch than just the general press of humanity in the same space. So Jesus asks about it. And here we have a woman who's touched him, a woman who's desperately ill. She's suffering from a continuous flow of blood for 12 years. She must have been extremely weak. We know that she was financially impoverished. She had multiple consultations with numerous doctors. None were able to help her. But it left her impoverished. She's unable to participate in communal life due to her ritual impurity. And she's broke. She's getting worse. She's desperate. So many people might have given up hope, but she's not. She's not given up. She has heard about Jesus, and she does the most rebellious act in all of Mark's healing miracles. She comes up behind Jesus, and she touches his cloak. She's aware, I'm sure, of her ritual impurity. She knows that she cannot simply touch another Jew, much less a rabbi. But she believes down deep that if she touches just his clothing, she will be made well. So she approaches Jesus by stealth. She comes up behind his back and you might say she pickpockets him. She pickpockets his power, as only those who are oppressed and desperate and despised know how to do. She is willing to take matters into her own hands, to touch the hem of his garment so that she could once again participate in community. And the healing itself is pretty remarkable, considering all the healings that we know about in the Gospels. Just look at it for a second. Jesus is in the midst of a crowd. It doesn't say this, but right before in our text, we know he's in the midst of a crowd because he is on his way to the house of an important community member. Because that community member has asked Jesus to come and heal his daughter. And so this is where Jesus is going. And a crowd has pressed in upon him. He's walking to heal another person when he is touched by this woman who pickpockets Jesus' power. Jesus does not perform in this text an active or a conscious healing upon a person who has begged for help. That came before this scene. And Jesus will go on to this man's house and heal his daughter. But in this case, the case of this woman, Jesus has no intention. He doesn't even know that she is there. He's not helping someone who's begged for help. This woman, she takes the healing for herself. And Jesus seems passive in the healing. She touches his garment from behind, and immediately, the text says, her hemorrhaging stops. She is healed and she knows it. And when she feels the power of healing enter her body, it is at that very moment that Jesus feels the power going forth from his. And so he asks, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples answer in the way that I probably would have answered had I been there. I mean, boss, come on. You know, there's so many people here. How in the world could you know who touched your clothes? We are all touching each other in this crowd. But Jesus isn't satisfied with that answer, and so he looks. He looks around to see who has taken this power from him. And the woman comes forward, the text tells us, fearfully and shaking. Some would say it is because she knows that she has broken the ritual codes by touching a rabbi that she comes fearfully. She knows that she's stolen from him. That's why she's shaking. But I wonder if there might be a deeper reason, a deeper explanation for her coming forward to tell Jesus the whole truth. But to get to that, we need to go back in the story again to Jesus' clothes. What was Jesus wearing? Different Bible translations will say that he was wearing a cloak or a robe, or it might just say clothing. Anonymous kind of clothing. We don't know what it is. In Matthew, there is a reference, not to this particular story, but there's a reference to people touching the hem of Jesus' garment or the tassel of his cloak and being made well. Have you ever seen a prayer shawl that Jews use in times of prayer? A friend of mine had one at camp this past week, and she said I could borrow it for this sermon, and somehow in the chaos, and believe me, there is chaos in camp, it didn't get exchanged, and she didn't bring it. So I've made an example that looks nothing like an actual prayer shawl, but I want to use it today for your help. Prayer shawls are typically white and blue with blue stripes, and they have tassels on the ends of them. So this is my makeshift prayer shawl today. So you can just imagine that it's white with blue stripes. It's called a talit, the prayer shawl is, and faithful Jews have worn them in all times as is commanded by Numbers 15, where it says this. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels at the corners of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel. And you will have these tassels to look at so that you will remember the commands of the Lord that you may obey them. Then you will remember to obey all my commands and will be consecrated to your God." So prayer shawls, they have these long tassels on each of the four corners. And these are called tzitzits. And they're tied into 613 knots which represent the 613 laws of Moses. They're tactile reminders of God's instruction to the people. And they hang down in the front and the back of the person who wears them. And it's much more likely that Jesus would have been wearing a prayer shawl than he would have been wearing that beauty pageant sash we talked about last week that those old Bible movies seem to show Jesus wearing. He would have been wearing probably a prayer shawl. And a fascinating tradition developed around the tzitzit, the prayer shawl, the four corners of the shawl. Where the tzitzit hang, that corner of those four corners, they're known as the knaf of the shawl. And that word, knaf, also means wings. And if you walk around holding a prayer shawl, you might get the idea where wings come from, yes? They look like wings. So God's wings were known as places of shelter and refuge. And there is this verse in Malachi 4, this prophecy in Malachi that says this: "But for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings." This obscure prophecy declares that when the Messiah comes, there will be healing in his wings, healing in his knaf, healing in his, what are these? Tzitzit. And the crowd presses in on Jesus, and this woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, she shoves and she pushes, even in her weakness, to get behind Jesus close enough so that she can touch his gown. I don't think so. I think what she wants to touch are his tzitzit, his wings. Why? Because there's healing in them. Because she believes the text that she has learned. She believes there is healing in his wings. So why does Jesus stop and ask, "Who touched me?" Why is he so intent on finding out who did it? Because somebody in this large crowd, somebody knows and believes that Jesus is the Messiah. So when he asks that question, she comes forward. She'd already been healed. I mean, she could have disappeared in the crowd and just gone back home with her healing. But she doesn't do that because healing isn't the only point. She comes to him with fear and trembling to tell the whole truth. She confesses her belief that Jesus is the Messiah in this act that she has performed. This is the same confession into which we are baptized. Do you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God? We ask. And to this whole truth, Jesus responds by calling her daughter. She's acted courageously in taking her healing into her own hands, but even more bravely in her genuine confession. Others pressing in on Jesus were following him, maybe to see if he could do what others had said he might be able to do, but she knew already that he could do it. Her genuine confession to him. And so he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Jesus calls her daughter, addressing not her issues, but her true identity. She is a member of the beloved community already. This is the story of an ordinary person who believed in the healing power of our extraordinary God, so she was willing to risk it all to touch the healing power to seek it out, to grab hold of it for herself. There's a beautiful poem that a woman penned several years ago about this woman. And I want to share it with you this morning. Once there was a wound. It was no ordinary wound. It was my wound, and we had lived together long. I yearned to be free of this wound. I wanted the bleeding to stop, yet if the truth be known, I felt a strange kind of gratitude for this wound. It made me tremendously open to grace, vulnerable to God's mercy. A beautiful believing in me that I have named faith kept growing, daring me to reach out for what I could not see. This wound had made me open. I was ready for grace. And so one day, I reached. There was a thick crowd. And there I was in the crowd, bleeding and believing, and I reached. At first, I reached for what I could see, the fringe of a garment, but my reaching didn't stop there, for someone reached back into me. A grace I couldn't see flowed through me. A power I didn't understand began to fill the depths of me. Trembling, I was called forth to claim my wholeness. The bleeding had left me. The believing, it remained. And strange as it may sound, I have never lost my gratitude for the wound that made me so open to grace. Friends, I think this woman represents you and me. For we all have wounds. And I don't know the specifics of what your hemorrhage looks like, or what it feels like, or how it is that you endure it, or even why it's occurred. But I have little doubt, like that light in me, there is something in each of you that is yearning for healing, begging for relief, seeking after a blessing, and willing to believe. All we have to do is approach Jesus, bleeding and believing though we may be. So our call is to reach out and touch the hem of his garment, to claim for yourself your rightful place as a child of God. Because sons and daughters and sons, your faith has already made you well. Would you pray with me? Oh Lord, our God, stop our bleeding and increase our believing. Fill our wounds with your healing. Remove our fear and cradle us in the wings of your peace. We ask all these things as we put our hands on the tassels of Jesus' garment. Amen.